Welcome to the Ecodylic Science Podcast, where we explore topics of biology, technology, and behavioral science.
Welcome to the Ecodylic Science Podcast. We have been away from you for some time, but we are here on our episode, the third one. And just to remind you why we are doing this podcast, what is the Ecodylic Science Podcast, if this is the first time you are seeing it. Ecodylic Science is a startup that I established with my business partner here, Jacob Davidson, and it has a big mission of bridging academia and industry by bringing advanced behavioral testing tools for both innovation in biology and also technological innovations generally. And in the first episode that you can check in our list, and of course, I don't need to remind you to click the subscribe button down to get updates. In the first episode, we talked about what is collective behavior, concepts like decentralization, networks, emergence. And then in the second episode, we delved into what are the techniques that people use in order to study collective behavior using high-resolution tracking, machine learning, modeling, simulations, and artificial intelligence. And today in our third episode, we are going to talk about real-life applications of these technologies that study collective behavior. So why not you get us started, Jacob? So what are the applications?
Sure. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for listening again. So last time we talked about different technological advancements, and now we're going to, some examples that are already in place using these, particularly in the areas of high-resolution tracking and monitoring, machine learning and data analysis, and modeling and simulation. And these are all really connect to the core missions of Ecodylic, and what we want to do is bringing these technological advancements to applications in healthcare, translational medicine.
So, always Jacob says this big words, high throughput tracking and monitoring systems. So give me some examples.
Yeah, let's bring it a bit more concrete. So
yes.
one talking about high resolution tracking and monitoring is already in use in wildlife conservation systems. Mm-hmm. And this you can imagine GPS tracking to follow animal movement and then set conservation policies based on this.
Oh, but maybe you should remind our listeners why wildlife conservation is important.
Wildlife conservation is very important for especially changing land use patterns and keeping the overall ecosystem in balance.
Exactly.
Like what if land use changes? How did it affect other species that affect? Then yes, this has a cascading effect.
Exactly. So if we use old technologies, something that's really important to highlight here is that as our societies, not only the human societies, animal societies become more complex, more digitized. It is very hard to depend on old paradigms where you, for example, track one animal or one human. So we really need new paradigms. And the first thing to tackle this application of this high throughput systems in wildlife is really cannot be done by just tracking one animal. You need to track multiple animals simultaneously. You need to be able to use machine learning to know their movement patterns, where they are, how is the changes in the ecosystem accounting for their movement. Can you give me some other example other than wildlife conservation?
Well, for concretely wildlife conservation, GPS collars are used in Africa to look at elephant movements, and in South America to look at movement of jaguars. And also in North America looking at Monarch Butterfly Migrations.
Great.
See how this is changing with climate changing and land uses. But other applications, another one is fitness trackers and
that's great.
Public health.
Now that's something I can pick up on. So all of us, you can imagine, I'm sure many of our listeners are using any devices to track their vitals, fitness tracking, Fitbit. We are not here advertising for it, but there are many others. When you use your iPhone, there are many apps that track your heart rate. distance traveled and others. And basically you can think about it. Of course, one can think about it on a personal level, that it's how do I enhance my performance and stuff like this. But if you zoom out and look collectively, it can give you ideas about what is the public health of a population. Like there is a project by the National Institute of Health in the United States to track 1 million Americans, because you can basically track problems like obesity, know the effects of, for example, obesity on the overall health of a population. So this becomes higher throughput than conventional polling and surveying methods that will be less reliable. So we can make this public health more quantitative.
Yeah, more quantitative. And that's one of the program in the National Institutes of Health called All of Us, and they aim to enroll a very large number of participants, I think 1 million, like you said, but collecting data from multiple sources.
Yeah, that's very key.
They're also using some more traditional sources of interviews and surveys, but collecting then the detailed data, which allows for more analysis. Another example is the Apple Heart Study. They're trying to get 500,000 participants of this, identifying people with Apple Watches, then identifying the pulse, using this data to identify irregular heart patterns.
If somebody have atrial arrhythmia or patterns like this, and that's very important. You can imagine, for example, in the future, we are able to predict heart attacks, and basically, for example, if the person is in an area, you can send an alarm to the area around it and people can save it. But I can also think, okay, so wildlife conservation, fitness tracker. I have an example on my mind, but let me just introduce it to the listeners. It's like almost all of us order things from Amazon, and always one wonders, things arrive very fast, and this is a very vast supermarket, like you can imagine Amazon is a marketplace of so many millions of things, but because of the optimization of the supply chain, we are able to really get things like Amazon Prime, things arriving on time. And behind all of this is really a lot of supply chain optimization, which, the warehouses have RFID chips. There is some GPS to trace the inventory, to tell you what is missing. So you have this collective systems that is like that is the supply chain, which has the many intermediaries, the things that are being manufactured. But if you treat them individually, you are really not being efficient. But if you collate this data in a way, treating the supply chain as a collective system, you are able to find algorithmic way to optimize it. That sounds plausible, right?
This is actually about what's in place. But in other episodes I talked about, I'm working with bees, and we're tracking honeybees, and we have thousands of bees. But in an Amazon warehouse, there's RFID tags that are following all of these inventory items move in and out of the warehouse, and also many thousand at a time, and the whole picture of how these are moving. There's some room for, with this data, you can optimize.
Yeah, Jacob here is saying also, we are here getting into something very important, is that thinking about collective system is a way of thinking. So, okay, a supply chain, I can think about it as just individuals of sequence of things, but I can think about it also as collective of things, individuals plus the hardware plus the software, and it really helps a lot to. So, okay, let us jump to the machine learning and data analysis. And today we are recording, you might not be seeing this podcast on November 5th, 2024, but today is election day in the United States of America. And a hallmark of every election season is misinformation on social media. And can you tell us about it a bit, Jacob, if you can?
So we talked last time about machine learning and data analysis methods. The idea here is extracting patterns of behavior to then predict some result or make recommendations on result. So, and this is a key part of the algorithms in, for example, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
Its name is X now.
Oh, yes. X, formerly known as Twitter, and YouTube's recommender system.
So and if you look at when you can use this machine learning methods to analyze how messages spread on social media, how's the newsfeed. But unfortunately, social media companies like Facebook and X have not done a great job into having an open, really a platform. The way they have this engagement-based algorithm makes it transform.
Engagement-based, exactly. Yes. So the key there is this. Like if we're using this to understand behavior, we want to understand, like I want to understand the behavior of the honeybees.
Right.
But in these platforms, the goal is to optimize or maximize user engagement.
Right.
And then unfortunately, in a lot of cases, this leads to more extreme content that is very attention grabbing, but maybe false.
Right. Another concept here that Jacob really alluded to is optimization. So every collective system, you want to optimize it for something. So of course, a lot of these companies really want to optimize user engagement, income based on advertisements, which lead to all these engagement-based algorithms. But somebody say, okay, if we want to fight misinformation, so we want to optimize for more open discussions, for less misinformation, for fighting misinformation. So this is a key point. You can construct a collective system, but it just doesn't, act by itself. It has to have something that it's trying to achieve, correct?
Yeah, and it has people interacting with it also.
Yeah.
So the key part is, that interacting with the system and then produces the outcome.
And then this
comes back to the emergence that we talked about before.
Exactly.
We need to think of it like this.
And this brings me to our next point, which is, okay, people interacting together, optimizing. One can think immediately about teams, teams in companies, teams in universities, want to achieve something. So how do you optimize team behavior? And there is, I'm sure people heard, some of our listeners heard something about organizational behavior, and there is a whole field that studies organizational behavior. But this revolution in software and hardware have also affected this there is, for example, a project in MIT called on reality mining. So this is a work of Professor Alex Pentlad in MIT, which they basically have these people sitting in a meeting room like the one we are sitting in, and they have them wearing something called sociometric badges that look at the engagement, physical proximity, the speech, your mobile phone interactions, how people are interacting, in order to find ways to optimize the team behavior. And this is an emerging field called social physics. But of course, we talk about this with a disclaimer of some ethical concerns, correct?
Yes. Well, when we're tracking all people's interactions and how they're interacting with each other, what type of information is exchanged and the messages exchanged, yes, there's a...
Because that's also and it is used also for other situations to keep us safe, like in the Paris 2024 Olympics. Artificial intelligence system will use to analyze CCTV from different sources in order to detect anything unusual. But again, this comes with, it's always, but this field of research is not unique. We always have to grapple with the use of something, the ethical concern, privacy. How do we really balance between them? And that will be something we cover in subsequent episodes. So we will leave it for now.
Yeah, and back on the organizational design. Yeah, I think Bank of America is also using sociometric badges, and now Microsoft has a program, Workplace Analytics, that looks at communication patterns, a bit more looking at message patterns.
Yeah.
And also, this is a full. I think this is really a growing field.
Right.
Google back a few years ago. Now I'm forgetting the name of the.
The Project Aristotle. Yeah.
Project Aristotle. They didn't use as much. This was back, I think, in 2016. It wasn't as much of actually tracking people, but more observation based. But really came out with some core collective behavior concepts of looking at how to compose the optimal team.
Right.
And some interesting findings after a bit more general is optimum team composition is not just all high performers. The key is how people interact within the team.
Yeah, and this only doesn't, this knowledge doesn't only have application for corporate setting. You can talk about social movements, how social movements succeed, how to optimize, how to really optimize, because also I'm sure a lot of our listeners will relate to these things. For example, if you are working on a company, sometimes you waste your time on a lot of meetings and there is no real output. But if you have really a way to maximize the efficiency of teams, this will be very important. So moving on, one can think about something else that involve collective behavior, and we cannot really deny it. Of course, all of us remember in 2020, there was a crisis called COVID, correct?
Yes.
Does collective behavior have to do anything with it, or what's the deal here?
So this ties into the modeling and simulation and behavior models, particularly collective behavior, and more tying it to real life behavioral patterns and how it could affect disease spread.
Right.
So
this for our listeners who were on the were complaining why scientists are confused, why they don't know when and where it's spreading, is basically goes down to how you model that disease spread. So there are models that are very simple, that takes previous models and extends them to COVID, and there are more sophisticated models that take into account how people move, and there are even more sophisticated ones that tie to genetic spreading and others. So this is an active field. So I know that people were frustrated during COVID that the predictions are not really accurate, but it's really a developing field to do this global tracking of epidemics, because the issue is that, again, reminding you of what I said, because our societies are becoming more interconnected, more complex. So you can have someone infected in the US, suddenly it's in Brazil, suddenly in China, because of the transportation patterns, because of the way we interact is not anymore local. And this will require more sophisticated modeling, and it's very important also to work on the predictive aspect. So what will happen if we have a similar pandemic in the future? What are because if we understand how a disease is spread accurately, we can fight it better, right?
Yes, we can fight it better, and particularly make decisions and policies that will help us reduce the transfer risk and reduce the incidence, while also not restricting people's work and movement. So this was used during the pandemic, but it's still not very well understood, because if we need to, if you take actual patterns of behavior into account, people don't mix randomly in a city of 100,000 people.
Right.
Your contacts with others are not random. You go to certain places, and there might be certain more places that are spreading, but we need to understand these aspects of the behavior. But we can do this with agent-based type modeling.
Right.
We talked the core assumptions.
Agent-based modeling is a term we use. If you can check our second episode, you will find us explaining what agent-based model. Another thing that one can think of when it comes to groups of people is naturally transportation. Transportation nowadays brings groups of people to another. Sometimes you hear people complaining about cities being segregated, areas being segregated. So in a way, transportation can really create communities, destroy communities, create new collective patterns of interaction, helps flourishing. And it's really, again, when you take this frame of collective behavior in mind, you can begin to think about optimizing emergent patterns. For example, I'm sure a lot of our listeners heard about the smart cities, like Singapore, for example. How do I make going from any part of the city to another part for work more efficient, more comfortable, faster, in order to have a better life, not only for a single individual, but for a big groups of people?
Yeah, exactly. This is an area that I think is growing a lot in
and will shape the future of urban planning, definitely.
Yeah, so you can imagine this is a complex system. It's many people. Say you can take either the bus, the subway, you can bike, you could walk, you could drive a car, but your decisions will be based on what options are available and how much time each takes and how much traffic it is. So at each point you are an agent making decisions based on what's available. So the urban planners are then using these a bit more realistic, actually taking into account how people make decisions to then say, oh, what if we then had the subway going twice as often in this time, and then it makes me more likely to take the subway, for example. How would this affect the overall transportation patterns? What would the cost be? And so on and so forth. With the right model, then we can really make these systems work better.
That's great. And another thing about agent-based modeling that I really think this is a field in which agent-based modeling will have a big impact is really fighting climate change, because the scientific evidence is very clear that climate change is happening. But what is very evident now is that people are just not convinced. Or how do we include the decision-making process of people in this trying to tackle the climate change? Why people are not convinced is not everyone that you will tell them, okay, it's a scientific evidence, they will just be convinced. Do you think this makes sense?
Yeah, this makes sense. I think this area will or should increase because it's a very important area. There's already climate modeling going on. For example, the IPCC is doing climate modeling to look at environmental impacts and changes. But I think more can be done here with incorporating people's behavior in response to these impacts.
Right. Because
decisions and movements, and maybe changing in where they're living because of the differences in available environmental opportunities.
Exactly. And this goes back, ties back to our issue about when we talked about misinformation. So another thing, crowds and crowd dynamics, you would think in extreme situations like evacuations, the agent-based modeling of crowds and how crowds move and how crowds interact is very important to design purposes in order to evacuate a place. For example, if there is a fire, if there is a catastrophe, that's very important. You can also think about when you are boarding an airplane. One can think about how would one optimize boarding an airplane. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have been frustrated by boarding an airplane, and maybe we can do this better by really modeling how people interact while entering an airplane. What is the best way to seat people in order to make it faster, taking into account people's behaviors, that they have a carry-on, all these kind of things. You can do it in an agent-based model.
Yeah, you could. I feel this has not been optimized.
Right.
Yeah, so, but the evacuating buildings, this actually can relate to some about collective behavior in insects. There are some interesting studies that has inspired design of buildings, I believe. If you look at, for example, if you have a door and you just want everyone to go out, depending on the placement, putting pillars before the door can then speed up people getting out of the door.
Wow.
Why would putting another obstacle speed up out of going up? But if you look at all the behavior interacting, then it makes a more laminar flow, or people going more in line before the door. And so then it actually speeds up flow. And then experiments with ants also showed, the same thing.
Wow. That's fabulous. So just to wrap up, I think it's very important to see, like for the last examples that Jacob have said, that inspiration from animal behaviors, animal collective behavior, how they interact, we can get inspiration on how to shape human behavior, how to analyze human behavior. And we can see also that the technological advances that are emerging within this area of collective behavior are just not of academic interest, but are touching every aspect around us in our life, from conservation, climate change, public health, supply chain, urban planning, epidemiology. So this is something that have a big impact. And we are going to leave for you all the references in the descriptions that you can check. And of course, you can get in touch with us. And this really relates to the mission of Ecodylic. This is basically give you a big view, like overarching view of what the philosophy and the mission behind Ecodylic is, really to bring some of these technologies, or hopefully all of them, to improve behavioral testing for analysis, especially in areas related to behavioral biology. Do you have something to add, Jacob?
Yeah, it's exactly this. So that's what we want to do in Ecodylic. All of these technologies are core parts of behavioral analysis, tracking systems, machine learning, data analysis, modeling, simulation. And for example, areas of translational medicine, there's a lot of possible applications that these areas can really be expanded to.
Great. So yeah, at the end of our episode, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you give us a lot of likes, a lot of subscriptions, and if you have any comments, please leave them, and hopefully we'll have our next episode. We'll have something also related to collective behavior, but surprise.
Yeah. See you next time.
See you next time. Take care.